Well, it's about time. Good morning. Welcome to this session on web deployment made easy seriously. And if you'll notice, there is a Twitter hash, the hash TEDev342. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But if you're Twitter inclined, feel free to start mentioning this session. My name is Michael Palermo, developer evangelist. Just recently joined Microsoft back in December. And excited to be here to talk about this. Although it appears I'm not, because according to the agenda, I have a yawn next to deployment. I'm going to explain what that means in a second. After we talk about just typical deployment, we're going to go right into a web deploy overview, and then the remainder of this session is just demos, literally, how to do it, starting with something simple, get a little bit more advanced, culminating up into even a deployment to the cloud in Azure. And then we'll have an interesting summary and Q&A, and you'll see what that's about in just a moment. So I find it fascinating about this topic. This is my first time actually speaking at TechEd USA. For the past 3 years, I've been speaking at TechEd in South Africa. And the first time was because there was a cancellation, and one thing led to another, and okay, can you help? And so had to fly 60 hours round trip just to do a 1-hour session, which was kind of interesting. But here, I'm speaking on a topic that I did at TechEd last year. And it was one of those things where it's like, hey, we'd like to invite you back, but can you take this session? And it was on web deploying. I'm like, boom. It's like I wasn't really in the mood to do web deploy. But then I did the session, and I thought, oh, that's okay, this is actually pretty cool technology. So learned about it, been using it since, use it for my personal website when I do deployment. But here's the thing that I find that's really interesting. When my daughters asked, and that's why I have this A to B here, when my daughters asked, hey, Dad, they're teenage girls, like, what are you doing something really cool over in Atlanta? Yeah, I'm going to be talking on web deploy. And what's that? It's about how to get your stuff from here to there. And, you can just see the, really? Like, okay, I'm surprised you'll get anybody in there. And that was really their response, like, wow, people would actually show for that talk? How dumb. And I thought, well, but here's what's interesting. It's really not that simple. That's why we're here. If it were that simple, we wouldn't need to talk on it. Something about the whole deployment model is obviously complicated. So that's why we have this, and we have a tool that is going to make things a lot simpler. Now, this session is designed for the dev, because what are we usually thinking about? If you're a typical developer, you're usually thinking about code and features and building things and doing exciting stuff like that. Getting to the point where you're actually having to worry about how this is going to get to its proper destination is probably not the exciting part. That's probably oh great, I have to do that part now. So that's another thing that I thought would be interesting to talk about is that's the typical profile that you would be. A dev who really doesn't want to worry about it, but you're probably here because you really have to worry about it and you're hoping that there's something that's going to make your life a lot easier. So that's what this is all about, what we typically think about and what we have to worry about. So think of, see if any of these things ring a bell with you. How you might be doing your deployment strategies right now. This isn't the first time I've done this talk, and a lot of people seem to resonate with, I have no clue where any of this goes. Some people literally live in an environment where they just push something to this little folder, and that's the black box, and they never know what happens from that point forward. Could be a lot of you are in that same category. A lot of different possibilities and worries that everyone has. And when it comes to deployment, what I figured out is everyone thinks they're special. Because if you get in a corner, you all have your coffee and you're talking, it's like, what do you do for deployment? Oh, we're special. We have to do it this way. So everyone thinks that they have this special way of doing things. And so this is the one thing I'm going to say about web deploy. I was with Mr. Kate, and we were doing basically a dry run of something like this in Phoenix, Arizona. And he's a gentleman I'm going to invite up here in a moment. And there was one guy that was talking and says, in our environment, we have this and we have these policies and everything's locked down, and how are we going to use that? You're probably not. So that's the thing. If you're in an environment where it's so locked down like that, don't know why you came, right? Because you can't even change anything according to what he said. So this might not be the solution for everybody, but I think it's a great solution for the majority. So I just chatted about him. I'm going to invite him up. Why don't you come on up, Mr. Scott Cate. I call him Mr. Community in Arizona because he is very involved with the community. He's ASP.NET MVP, Microsoft Regional Director. He's currently with a company called Event Day. And the reason why I wanted to bring him up is because I thought, when I was chatting with Scott about this a while back, I thought he kind of personifies a typical person who might attend. Pretty advanced developers, had a variety of development types of projects, whether they're ASP.NET, Windows Phone, Azure, you name it. He's probably been involved with something like that. Yet when I asked him about Web Deploy, he said, I dabbled with it, but didn't really embrace it. And I thought, that's the perfect candidate for this kind of session. So I thought he would personify that. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and give him an opportunity to interact with you, because I would like to hear what your current strategies are. So Scott, go ahead and take it.
Thanks, Michael, for having me. Yeah, this came up about a week ago, and Michael was originally scheduled to do this talk solo, and we talked about the idea of me coming up and kind of doing some interaction, because I've been a developer in ASP.NET for the last 10 or 11 years. And I've done all kinds of deployment, probably the same types of deployment that you guys have done. So how are you deploying now? Just a couple people in the front row. How do you get from your development box to production? Some people have one step. Some people have X or unknown steps. What do you guys do? I use the publish feature. You use the publish feature, so you're already using part of deploy. And you publish to file, or how do you publish? So you publish to a UNC folder on your network, and then somebody else takes it from there and gets to the next stage. So during publish, do you have any transformations that are happening with webconfig or any of the other files that you have in place? Okay. What about somebody else? What do you guys do for web deploy?
We have 9 non-product environments that we have to transform.
So you have 9 non-product environments that you have to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and there's different people in the way every step of the way. So with web deploy, we can do packages, and we can transfer those. The nice thing about package, you can always go back to an old package. A lot of people just copy files over, and then once what was once there is no longer. So what do you guys do?
We use script to build it into a folder, and then you have some logic.
So some sort of continuous integration using MS Build. So I think the point of this quick conversation is we've talked to 3 people. We could talk to 100 people, and we probably get 100 different answers. And the point is that Web Deploy is there to help you with most of those steps. It's probably not going to be the auto magic bullet that solves the entire deployment process. But if you have Web Deploy in your bag of tricks, there are a lot of options that are available, which you'll see over the next couple of minutes. So one of the things to remember that's tricky about Web Deploy is going from your development settings to production settings with maybe 9 steps individual. Maybe you have testing, or maybe you have staging where connection strings need to change, and all of those scenarios are covered. So we'll spend some time on that.
So,
go
ahead.
I'm also going to be watching the Twitter feed. So if you have a question, I'll be monitoring this if you use the hashtag of TEDev342, and we'll bring those up if we can several times throughout the day or throughout the session. So with that, we'll hand it back over to Michael. Thanks for having me.
Very good. In fact, another thing, I'm going to plug Scott. He's a speaker here at TechEd as well, and I just found out right before this started, someone approached and just confirmed that he's ranked as one of the top 10 speakers at TechEd for X amount of years. So it's actually a compliment to have him here. Keep in mind what he said about that Twitter roll thing. If you tweet out and you use that hashtag, think about your web deployment right now, and if you see something as we're going through the demos and you're thinking, I need to know if this can do this or this or that, that's what that's there for, because he's going to ping me at certain intervals and say, hey, I think I got a question that might be relevant to where we're at right now. So definitely make use of that. So I'm going to go back just for a second to talk talking about the overview of Web Deploy. So it's a strategy. It's a technology, of course, to get things from A to B and to handle all the necessary things around it. So as this slide is building itself, look at all the different features that it touches on. That one-click publish, yet a differential sync is a big one. That you can actually deploy to a web farm is possible as well. Taking advantage of team build integration, extending it. And we're going to see a little samples of most of these things as we go forward with the demo. So Visual Studio does obviously embrace the Web Deploy, and so do other products. In fact, Web Matrix takes advantage of it. LightSwitch takes advantage of it, and of course your command prompt would be used for scripting. Now, if you are in the category of, in fact, I'd like to see a show of hands on this. How many of you have or may need in the future to ever deploy to a web hosting provider of some kind, a web host, public web hoster? So that's a good showing of hands. Yeah, about 50%. So this is something nice to know about. If you're wondering what are my options, you go to microsoft.com/web/hosting/home. There is a little area on the left side of the screen that allows you to filter, and if you can see, the checkbox there is who offers Web Deploy. So you can reduce all the displays of all the web hosting providers out there and make that possible. So I definitely would encourage you to check that out, especially if you don't know if your current provider supports it or not, or you want to know if there's another one out there. And they're ranked, they're priced, you get to see it all right there, so it's a really good opportunity to do that. All right, well, that pretty much gets us into all the demos right now. So I'm going to switch over to the demo box. And, you know, keep in mind that one of the things about this session is we want to make this easy. You know, for such a complicated topic, we want to make it as easy as possible to do. So I think it'd be fun right now, and he doesn't know I'm going to do this, but I think it's so easy. I'm going to have Scott do the first demo. So let me ask you this, though. Have you ever deployed using Web Matrix?
In my professional development career, I have used Visual Studio for the last 10 years. I have never even opened Web Matrix.
Okay, so this
and
will be fun.
that is the truth, and this is not
sure.
This is not scripted.
So that icon right there, the little one, yeah, go click that one. There's Web Matrix. So Scott Kate, here's Web Matrix. Go to My Sites and go ahead and click that point and say OK. This is a site that is already in existence. So for right now, what we're going to discuss is the fact that within Web Matrix, you know, this talk isn't about creating a site, it's about deploying it. So I created a simple web pages type app. And in fact, just to see how it looks right now, go ahead and click the Run button up there in the upper left. And this is going to pull up. So, you know, I thought, okay, I'll create the Palermo family website and, you know, just have some fun with that. So, you know, just very simple. Now, what I want you to do is go to where it says Palermo-discountasp.net. All right, so apparently I have not deployed yet. You saw what the site should look like locally, and this is the content that's currently at the web hosting provider right now. DiscountASP.net is one of the web hosting providers that offers Web Deploy, and I'm using them in this demo. My biggest fear for this session was, please let there be internet access and good internet access, and it looks like so far we're doing good. Now, what I'd like you to do is where it says Publish, hit the down arrow and go to Settings. So this is pre-populated with what's necessary to get and use Web Deploy to get my site over to their host. So I don't have to use FTP. And I also want to focus on the fact that right over to, if you don't mind showing this over to the right, you see where it says Import Publish Settings. That Import Publish Settings works when a web hosting provider gives you a link on their site, and DiscountASP.net does this. They'll say, hey, if you want to just, you know, you're already logged into your site and your admin screen, you could download your published settings, and then you could just directly import it. And that's what I did here. So it's just an XML file that contains the necessary information. It just populates that for you. I've already done that. So go ahead and cancel out of here. And now click on Publish. Just go ahead and click that right there. Now what this is going to do is it's going to look, and you'll want to probably check that delete files on the remote so we can get rid of what was there before, and let it determine its changes first. So what it's going to do is it's going to try to figure out, okay, let me see what's on this side. I'm going to see what's on that side, and I'm going to determine what changes are going to need to be made. And go ahead and check that starter site SDF. That's a SQL Server CE database, and hit continue. So what's going to happen is in the bottom of the screen, it's going to start the publishing. And so WebMatrix has built basically a package, and now it's going to send that package across the wire, and it's going to do what it can to get my little site up there. It says publish is already complete. You can click that link to see if that's actually true. And there we go. Congratulations, Mr. Kate. You have successfully used WebDeploy with WebMatrix. So that is it. Now that's probably the simplest of the demos, and now it's going to get a little more complicated. But when that's pretty simple to do, I mean, wouldn't you say that's easy?
Yeah.
Relatively easy. Thank you, Mr. Scott. So I'll go ahead and close that out. And now switch over. And that was basically a web deploy with WebMatrix. Now I want to talk about web deployment options in Visual Studio 2010. And some of these might resonate with you because I think I heard a couple of you say something to such effect. If I close WebMatrix out, open up Visual Studio, if I go over to the, one of the things I'm going to highlight is what you can't do. I don't know if you can recognize this at all where I'm at, but this is a website, not a web project, and that's why it looks the way it does. If I right-click it and click Publish Website, I'm going to get a traditional type of a look, what we've been accustomed to. So this would not be considered web deploy. This is just considered publishing. So for example, post to a share, FTP, or whatever the case would be. So web deploy is not an option for websites. So it's only an option if you're using web application projects. MVC or the web forms that are web application projects, not websites. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight. But now that we're here, let me go down to this site, and I'm going to right-click it, and I'm going to show what it would look like if I click this Publish. So this is going to be a different view. Down below my Publish method, if I scroll down, you're going to see that we can still publish the old way, if you will, through FTP, file system, or front page server extensions. So you have those options here, and this little screen that you see here is a publish profile that says, okay, I want to create a profile that's going to map to the destination, where we're going to go.
Let me just interrupt for a second.
Please.
If we look at a Twitter account, and question came through,
Yeah.
Does this work with, did I get the right one?
No.
Does this work with IIS 6? And the answer is no. Web deploy is IIS 7 only, but it's important to what Michael's talking about now because you can still use web deploy on your local machine, and that local machine you can deploy to the file system, and then that becomes your zip and send package. So you don't have to manually copy the files one by one. So you can still use web deploy with IIS 6. You just don't have the auto pushing mechanism because IIS 6 doesn't have that server-side listener.
Thank you. Thank you for covering that, Scott. Now, if I keep it at web deploy, the option itself, I have some other options in here, like what will be the target destination of where this is going to go, what's going to be my site or application name, and whether or not I'm going to mark it as an app, an IIS app, or leave the files there or not. So a little different than what you saw with the WebMatrix, but basically, it allows you to create that profile. And I think the major thing that I wanted to stress on this was this build configuration piece. Because there's kind of multiple dimensions going on with our web deploy. There's the profile, and then there's your build configuration. So right now it says build configuration for debug. Well, if I cruise over here, let me just go ahead and X out of here. If I go back over to this familiar look. If I switch this from debug to release, then that's going to say, and which configuration build am I going to send? So the profile remains the same, but our settings in Visual Studio are what make things slightly different. Are we going to send the debug version? Are we going to send the release version? Or any other type of configuration mode that we would have set up in our configuration manager?
And that will also determine the transformations to use.
That's correct. Absolutely. So I think with the build and release modes discussed, I think I want to get right into the Transforms project. So I'm going to go right over here and show what it would take to basically get a deployment package set up and what a deployment package is. If I right-click the Transforms project that I have here and say, let me build a deployment package, what that's going to do is it's going to create a deployment package for me. Now, where is it that that's going to go? If I cruise down into the site and show all the files and look underneath the object, in fact, just to prove a point here, I'm going to blow these away. So delete those, and I'm going to build this again. I'm in, as you know, I'm in debug mode, so let me go ahead and build the deployment package, do a refresh, and now there's only a debug folder here. If I expand that out and look underneath package, I'll just go ahead and show this in Windows Explorer, but a package is ultimately a zip file that gets created. And if you think about it, this is one of the key things about web deployment, and that is this package. The ability to build this kind of self-contained snapshot of a particular configuration build that's ready for deployment. So it contains everything that's needed. I'm going to, in fact, let me just zoom in on that just a little bit. So you can see there's some other files that are above it. These are supporting files for that particular package. For example, that deploy.cmd is an auto-generated command file that will deploy for you. By default, it's just going to deploy to your local, and it does everything that you need. It just has it all set up. And of course, you can go in there and tweak it and modify. The set parameters I'm going to talk about later. That's about feeding some information into it as it's on its way to its target destination. And the source manifest just provides information that helps the web deployment engine to know what was at the source and to do a little bit of its synchronization stuff.
So for your 9-step deployment process, this might be step 1, package all of this together and send it off to step 2. And then step 2 can maybe massage those set parameters, change the configuration file, and then move it on to step 3 and 4, and now you have a single package that can live throughout that life cycle. Maybe the file name is date time stamped or something, but that's a great scenario for you.
So now you'll notice that the debug folder was created, but there wasn't a release one. So if I switch over to a release and then do another build deployment package, then it's going to do basically the same thing here. I hit refresh, go down to release, show this in the Windows Explorer, and once again, if I go down to package, it built the same thing, except this is using the release configuration settings. And you're going to see the relevance to that in just a moment, but it could make very interesting changes between one version to the other. Now, I just showed how you can create a deployment package. It's interesting, that's all I've done. I haven't deployed anything, I've just created a package that can be deployed. The other thing I want to showcase is how this can also be done outside of Visual Studio. So I'm going to minimize Visual Studio for a moment, and I'm going to pull up Notepad. And this is an example of a script that's created that says, okay, let's go ahead and target with MS Build. I heard somebody in the audience say earlier that they're using MS Build in some of their stuff. So this is what I'm doing. I'm calling it. I'm saying, okay, my project is here. I want to set my, let's say, my config mode to debug. And here's my package location where it's going to go. And then go ahead and execute MS Build with that target project and where I want the destination package to go. You can see that my destination package is going to go to web deploy demos, packages, transforms, and then it'll create a folder based on my config mode. So if I were to look at that particular file path and go to Packages and Transforms, you'll see there's nothing in there at this time. It's empty. Now, I'd like to go ahead and execute this particular command. So Transforms, hit that. And so it's going through. It built that package. If I go back over into my folder, you can see it now. I thought I set it to release or debug, but let me see. I didn't. Cheers. Now you get to see what a debug looks like. So I'll just hit that again. And go back, and you're going to see there's a debug and release mode. And basically, it's creating that same kind of grouping of files that we saw earlier in Visual Studio under that object folder. So just to prove that you can build these things outside of the environment if you need to have it scripted or whatever the case is to get to this deployment package. Remember, the deployment package is kind of it contains all the files, and it also contains settings in there that basically communicate with the destination and says this is the kind of settings I need. The settings could be IIS-type settings. It could be registry settings. It could be database changes. So there's a lot of things that can be happening in there. So I think that that's a compelling reason to take a look at why you might want to use WebDeploy with these packages because of what you can do. Okay.
So let's take questions during Twitter or via Twitter or afterwards on the mic so we can keep going. I do have something real quick on Twitter that's applicable. We did look at this a moment ago. When you deploy, does it delete all the files on the folders on the server? There's actually a checkbox that allows you to leave the files that are there. That's great if you're only uploading 2 or 3 changes, or if you click the checkbox that we talked about earlier, it will wipe everything out first, and then it also supports ASP.NET App Offline. So if you have an offline file, you can drop that in first. Your website will then show application is offline instead of a yellow screen of death, and then we'll deploy all of those files.
And maybe related to that question too, I would also say, if you did happen to have let me go to this one actually, right here. If you did happen to have, let's say you've deployed to a site and you did not have that checkbox checked, that delete all the files, or you want to keep everything there, and you redeploy again to it, and you've made only 3 changes in your project, it will be smart enough to only actually update that server with the 3 changes, not blow everything away and reproduce it. It's really at deployment time you have some control over that process. So that's where that differential sync comes in. So instead of blowing it away and rebuilding it every time, you could select to do that, or you can allow for that differential sync. So we talked a little bit about what's in a package, and to keep it simple, it's just basically a file structure of your files and some additional settings inside that communicate what kind of settings need to be there. I want to now do a deploy. So first, real deployment. And we're going to do this one first locally, even though we've done, I should say,
second deployment.
Should say second because WebMatrix is not a second-class citizen. So me scusi on that. So what would it take? I'm going to go over here, and we'll start off by going to the Transforms project, and I want to send this one off to the local IIS. Don't! You are so correct. I saw hands going, look at the screen. Look at this. So thank you. Very good. So I'm in the Transforms project again. What I want to do is cruise over here to create publish settings, and I'm going to create a new one. And first of all, I can give it a name. So I'm going to say Transforms-IIS. So I'm going to, local IIS here. In fact, let me put the word local there. I'm going to use WebDeploy. I am going to go to my local host. And the site application, you'll notice down here it gives an example. It says, well, you can go to default website /my-app. And that's because our typical default installment of IIS has a default website, and then you can create a virtual directory underneath unless you're deploying to that default. Well, I'm going to deploy to demos/transforms. Now, demos is another site that happens to be on this particular machine, and it's going to create a virtual directory under it. I'm going to mark it as an IIS app. I do not want to leave any files there. I'll just blow away anything that might have been there, and I'll go ahead and click Publish. Now it says the publish succeeded. So if I open up Internet Explorer and say, let me go to demos/transforms, then as it's communicating with IIS, first time hit to this particular site, it's going to pop up and it's going to show it is not, oh, I must have accidentally deployed the release version. So how can I change that? I'm going to go back over here and say, I don't want to go release, I want to send the debug version. Will that actually make a difference? Let's see. Now, since my profile has already been set up, all I have to do is just click this button, just publish. It's going to see what settings that I wanted. And then I go back over to IE and hit refresh. And now something changed. It just says MVC site. So it was intelligent enough to understand, because based on how the code is in that site, the site's basically taking some information based on how it was sent, and it's communicating what version it is. I also see here that there's some settings that I can look at, and these settings are coming from my app config, and that's going to make a difference in a moment so that you can see how we can be making changes between one configuration build to another. So that's one way that you can do your publishing, of course, is by doing so through this, how easy it was in Visual Studio 2010. Another way that you can accomplish this is through scripting. So I'll pull Notepad++ up again, and I have a transforms debug command file. Now what this is using is now it's using MS-deploy. And it's going to say, let's go ahead and synchronize the debug version of the zip file that I created a little while ago, and let's deploy that over into IIS. So I'm going to open up IIS right now, and we can see if I cruise into here and hit refresh, and I'll zoom in on that. You see that the Transforms website's there. I can right-click it, and I could click remove, and I don't know if you know this, but if you click remove, it doesn't actually delete the content. It just removes it as a virtual directory. If I go to deploy and say delete application and content, kind of an odd place you might see that menu option there, but if I do that, it's actually going to completely get rid of it. So
that cleans up the file system also.
Cleans it completely up, so it's obliterated. I go back over here and hit refresh. There's nothing there. Now I'll go over back to this command file. I'm going to now call it transforms-debug. And now through script, it's going to deploy to the local IIS. Now, and interestingly enough, it's going to deploy what we also built in script just a little while ago. So it's not taking from the Visual Studio object one, it's taking from that snapshot I did a while back. If I go back over to IIS, hit refresh, I see the Transforms is there, and then I can go ahead and browse that through IIS, and the site's there.
So flip over to Twitter.
Sure.
We've got a question that, can you add or change something in web config through deploy without overriding the target web config? My answer is yes and no. So with the transformations that we're actually leading into now, you'll see how you can manipulate the attributes of web config so that for the environment you're deploying to, they are correct. However, it seems like this question is more asking, on the target, can I open web config and modify one of the XML nodes or one of the attributes? And the answer to that is no. At the end of the day, you are doing a replacement of that web config, and so it would be up to you to transform that web config on your local machine before it's deployed to the target.
Thanks.
I think we're going right into transformations, right?
Pretty quick, almost. The only other thing that I want to talk about while I have IIS here is that I used a script in order to do the deploy. But one of the fundamental concepts of web deploy is to think about, it's really interesting. You have your package, which we talked about, but there's source and destination. And the source and destination changes based on what mode you're in. If you're in Visual Studio and you're going to deploy to a target destination, then your development environment was the source, builds the package, sends to the destination. That might be a common scenario. But Scott even mentioned something that was really interesting earlier, and that is sometimes you could look at these packages as snapshots, as opposed to looking at it as a maybe deployment, so to speak. It could be a snapshot of a website at a certain time. In that case, and this is even in the MSDN documentation for web deploy, in that sense, the web package becomes the source. And also, the middle ground. And then IIS could be the destination, although it could be the pooling piece. We always think send to IIS. But I'm going to demonstrate how it can also be done a different way. I'm going to blow away the transforms again. So delete the application and content, yes. And now over on the far side of IIS, there's a way for me to import an application. And I can also get to that same thing by right-clicking demos and say, I would like to import an application. So I'm going to click on that, and it says, well, what package would you like to bring into this environment? So I'm going to browse over to, let's say, the release version of the package that was built here, this one here, and say Open. I'm going to click Next. And what this shows is a dialog that says, okay, here's what we're bringing in. Now, this is something that IIS administrators are going to love. They have control here of what actually will be brought in from the package. And this is also a screenshot that proves the point that there's more than just content. I mean, the content piece is all here. This is where the content is. Everything that's surrounding this is metadata or settings about this particular project. And so, for example, let's make sure that we have read permissions on the content. And this could be modified so that you can say read write. If I hit next, now this is key because I'm about to demonstrate something else. So just know this. When I hit next, it's asking me for one thing or two. The first one is the name. So I'll keep it at transforms. The next one is it observed that I had an application services connection string. Would the IIS admin like to change that right now? I think that's important for you to know that if you are like, they won't tell me what it is, I don't know. And you don't have to with these packages because they can fill it in on their own. And thus, you wouldn't have to worry about it. So I'm just going to keep it the way it is because I'm just proving that you can import this package as well. I'll hit next. It's doing the import. It's done. I click finish. I go back over here. There's transforms. And of course, I can view it in the browser, which I'll do. And when I whoops, I got to put transforms up here. There we go. And it's going to show, and of course I did import that release version of the package, and that's why we're seeing it that way. So I'll go ahead and X out of there. There's a question.
Yeah. When you say application for the project, are they the same thing on the package? You know, like a new project?
So I think if I understood the question correctly, it was when you're importing an application, is it really just saying, go get me a package? And
No, very good. So when it's the project, because usually in the real world, usually you have several projects in one application.
Yeah, it's the compiled deployment altogether as an application.
yeah.
Correct.
Well, it's going to include everything that website was configured to have, and if you had references to other projects, they're already going to be inside of that.
So actually, the web application actually is the whole website.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay, so you just saw one example of how that can be done. I think it's important to see another one. I'm going to also import one more, just so you can see the power of how this can work. I just imported a simple MVC site. There's nothing really special about it. But now I'm going to import another one. I'm going to browse over, this time to DOSBlog, which provides their own package that you can download yourself. I'm going to say open, and I want to see if you could see a difference when I hit this next screen. See, that's a little different. See, before there was only 2 options. Now I got several. So I could say, yeah, das Blog for me. So good. And then I'm going to change this to say demos instead.
Change that to an E.
Oh, yeah, not for Mr., for me. And then blog title is for me. And my name, and Mike Palermo. Then I scroll down, and there's even more settings there. What's your email address? So I'll just keep that one there. Admin name, admin, and password. So I'll just put one in here and confirm it. See, whoops, I think I did that one wrong. If I hit next now, it's building this up. It provided additional information. Somehow that package was smart. It said, hey, I need more information for me to be built correctly. So if I go over now to browse this, and whoops, let me do this a different way. Let me get out of this screen. X out of here, go to the refresh. There's that one. Now I'll browse it. And I'm going to have, in just a second, once it does its initial build, I don't know how long that was, probably with my typing issues. It was even longer than it needed to be, but literally in like less than a minute or two, you can have yourself, a DOS blog engine. And I don't know why the settings didn't just take place, but let me pick a theme.
So just to reiterate on our 9-step process, this might be the person in stage 2 accepting a package from person in stage 1. And then you could easily send that package around and do a deployment to staging, then testing, etc.
Yeah, I'll have to figure out why I didn't get my CSS theme working here in a second. But it actually deployed. I probably.
And the nice thing about that is it deployed a database, it deployed
everything
and
needed.
package.
It was fully functional, just I missed a theme thing somewhere. And we're going to be revisiting that in a second anyway, with another way that can be done. So with that said, let me go back over here. And we've deployed to IIS, and now we're going to get to probably the thing that's the most interesting part of this session, and that's what can be done behind the scenes with transformations. So I'm going to reduce this down and cruise right on over.
Let me interrupt
Please.
for a second. If you could jump
Sure.
to Twitter. This question's come up by 3 different people. Does it include app pool creation? Remember, web deploy is going from your source to a target, and we're assuming that target already exists. So the app pool is already going to be set up, and to my knowledge, that's not something that is something we can do during web deploy. I'm assuming that the app pool is already assigned, and those settings in IIS are already created as the destination. Is that right?
Well, and my response to that is, for a certainty, I know that you can target an app pool over there. I don't know quite sure if you can actually have one created. That would be one that's a good follow-up question.
Okay.
But you can definitely target a specific app pool.
I'll do some research now and
what's that?
try to find the answer.
I think in the project properties, I think you can say include IIS settings.
Right.
The application looking locally and then create that.
So confirmed answer here, and I'll do some research while you're doing your
Sure.
demo.
I'm pretty sure
that
you're
you
right.
can create it.
I'm pretty sure you're right. So
Back
over to the configuration hacks. I just want to open up a web.config file and just kind of let you know what I mean by transformations. If we look at look at line 12, key mode, value equals dev. I don't know if any of you have ever done something like this, but when you've been trying to deal with, okay, here's the target machine, here's the destinations, and what we might do is these hacks, where it's like, oh, okay, well, I need to set that I'm in dev mode, and then I might create these 3 different settings where are preceded by this mode key, and that's going to determine which one we're going to use. And at that might be archaic because you might not even have the settings to some of the other environments. But that's just kind of leading into how we're going to address that issue. You'll notice on line 18, or you could comment and uncomment. Okay, right before I deploy, I'll comment this one out, and then And I'm not inventing these. This is what I'm hearing. This is what people are doing. Or you could use config source, which means maybe you'd go over to the connection strings and say config source equals, point it to an external file, and then that file's never deployed because it's going to be different on each particular environment. So different ways that can be managed. Well, you're not here to see how it was done. You're here to see how it can be done. So I'm going to close this up, and we're going to go back down over to the Transforms project, where we're going to talk about some basic transformation stuff. If I cruise down into the web.config file, and you've probably seen this already. This is not like some mystery as it was maybe when this first came out. Our web.config files now get this separated view, where we have web.config, and then we have two other configurations that are right underneath it. So the reason for that is because now we can target to that build. If I go into my web.config as it is, you can see in my app settings I have MVC site with the key dev1, dev2, dev3. Some simple app settings in here for demonstration purposes. And now I'm going to cruise over to the debug version of this file, which currently I'm going to show at least a few of these. There's 8 transforms out of the box that you can do. And what that means is in this file, I have the ability to say, let's keep the web.config file the way it was, but this is going to represent what I want differently in a debug mode or a debug build. So I'll collapse that out, and the first thing that I'm going to do in my app settings is I'll want to change the value of that title. Now, I'm in app settings, so think about this. When you're doing a transformation, think about, well, what would you want it to look like? So that's the first thing I'll do. I'm going to say, well, I want to add key equals title. And at this point, we might be thinking, well, we already have one called title. Well, remember, what I'm doing now is I'm saying, I want to change it. In this example, I want to change what I want it to be. So the key equals title. The value is what I'm going to change to be different. I'm going to say, debug on IIS. Now, it can't just be left to this. I need to inform the transformations engine what's going on. So at this moment, I'm going to hit Control-KX, which invokes code snippets, and go to My XML Snippets and choose a locator. I basically want to do a match. What a match is I want to be able to say, look for something in the original web.config and match, in this example, match the key attribute. So if you find an app settings with the key equals title, match that, and now what do you want to do? Well, I'm going to do another code snippet here. I'm going to say Control-KX to My XML Snippets, transforms. I'm going to do a replace transform. So that's an example of writing it. Those code snippets are not out of the box, by the way. They're downloadable. I didn't mention this before, but Palermo4.com, there's a blog post there right now that has a whole bunch of links, and one of them is where you can download the snippets for your environment. It includes all the transformation options that are out there to make it easier to build them. For the sake of time, however, I'm just going to go ahead and open up my toolbox for a moment and just drag and drop a few other ones in here to showcase how they can work. So I've just done a replace for the title. I'm going to do another replace here, and it's going to be on changing that value for key equals 1. Now I want to show how this actually can work. If at this moment right now I do a build and debug mode, and specifically, let's say that I even say, at this level, let me build a deployment package. We're in debug mode. If I cruise down and view all of the information under here, under debug, there's a transform web.config file, and it shows me what the transformed result's going to be. So I'm going to open up this web.config. Now, did you see how lines 11 and 12 changed compared to this web.config, which was the original, and this web.config, because in the debug version right now, I've modified those two. Let's see what happens when I cruise back over to the web.config transform and add a remove. So if it finds 2, remove the entire thing. Or let's go ahead and also insert this particular key. So one that wasn't even in the web.config. Build the deployment package. And now if I go over to my web.config, from this version over here, you can see I have an additional 4 compared to what was there originally. So you have the power to modify elements within based on the configuration build. There's more things that you might be thinking about, such as, of course, connection strings. If you happen to know the destination connection string, that's within your world, and you want to deploy with that particular one, this would replace, for example, the application services one to point to that different one. Another option that you might have here is custom errors, how to turn errors off. So replace whatever mode was there and make it off for that particular debug world. Just to showcase other possibilities in the release version, hey, let's go ahead and remove the debug. No need to say debug equals true on the release version. Also, maybe we'll turn custom errors mode on and redirect to an error page. So just some examples of how you could be thinking about how these transformations can be used. So with that, I think that another thing that is really important to notice about transformations is that all of this so far is an MS Build technology, meaning it's in MS Build that these transformations are taking place. It's not in Web Deploy. So these transformations happen basically for the package to get ready to go. We're going to talk about another way to do something similar at deployment level. But before we do that, I want to showcase another thing that can be done at the build level, something that might be very interesting to you, and that is I have here a targets file, and I'm going to rename it. I'm taking the hide me extension off, and then I'm going to open it up so that you can take a look here. This targets file, by virtue of the name of the targets file, which is the name of my project, and let me zoom in so you can see this one. It's the name of the project .wpp.targets. Because of its naming convention and its location in the root directory, it's going to include these steps in the MS Build process. So it's a way for me to inject them in without having to open up the project file and do it that way. I could just do it right here. And what this is doing is it's saying, hey, if we're in release mode, let's go ahead and compile or compress the CSS, any CSS that we have for release. So if we take a look at the content here and look at the site CSS, you can see that it's expanded. Well, now that I've undone this here, and I'll go ahead and blow away under the object anything that we had under the release and just delete it. I'm going to set my release here and build a deployment package. So with that done, if I were to cruise in, I'll refresh and cruise into the package, and specifically in the content section and open this site CSS, because I had that custom transformation, it automatically minified my CSS for me for the release version. Another nice little thing that you can include when you're building your sites, and you could do this, of course, for JavaScript files as well. So for debug, expand. For release, let's compress. I thought I'd share that before I go on to the next thing.
One thing I wanted to just point out, and this isn't something we'll dive deep into here, but I want you to know that everything we're doing through Visual Studio is just UI candy. All of this can be done from the command line. So if you're in a continuous integration environment, you can do some tricks. It's very easy to find this. You can do some tricks to turn on the output window so you can see the command line of everything that MS Deploy is doing. So you can kind of copy and paste that into your CI environment. So I want you to just put a little tick in the back of your head that Web Deploy is not just about UI candy. If you have a CI build environment with MS Build, all of this can be highly, highly automated and customized for your scenarios.
In fact, excellent segue to this is the XML file that remember when we imported DOSBlog in and it asked all those UI questions? Well, those were parameters. Well, what if what I want to do instead is deploy and automatically fill those questions in? I don't want to sit in front of a UI and do it. What if I already have those answers? There's a way for me to do that. This is called the Set Parameters XML. And you can web deploy with it and say, when you deploy, for any of those kind of questions that get asked, let me go ahead and answer them right now.
This is how the default values were filled in for the DOSBlog demo that you did.
That's correct, right. Except now I'm going to override those and I'm going to set up my own DOSBlog doing this. And to prove another thing that Scott said, if I go over here to this particular script, this is a web deploy that's going to deploy that package, and then the key here is set the parameter file. If I do that, it's going to set it and answer all the questions so it's automatically done through script. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now.
So my question is did you type that original command line or did you steal it from the output window?
No, actually I did type this one, but I know what he's talking about. You're
Okay.
going to see an example where you can have that included already.
Okay.
Absolutely. So let's see. This one is DOSBlog, and roll them. So it's going and deploying using those parameters. If I go over to IIS and go ahead and do a refresh, I see that one there. And let's go ahead and browse that one and see if it's going to be friendly with the
CSS.
themes. Because that classic,
There we go.
worked on my machine mode earlier. So yeah, I took the settings that I had, and then I can change it to something like DOS Emerald, and have a blog up in no time. Through script, it was virtually under 30 seconds to do.
And that's just the parameters XML file, so you can imagine that easily being part of your deployment for staging, even in source control to pull down different packages, and it's easy to modify based on the next step that you're working with.
Absolutely. Now, one question that you might have is how did they do it? When I deployed mine, I didn't get no. I just got what's the name of your site? What's your connection string? See ya. And yet there is more options. So I'm going to show you how you can pull that off. All you need to do to provide your own custom parameters for your project is to go in and have a parameters XML file. Now I'm going to rename this again. Take the hide me off so it's just parameters XML. And I'm going to open this up so that you can see. It's a set type of XML file. It follows a certain syntax. And I'm going to showcase here how I can just simply add one custom input type called a title. And just expand that out. Now, it's kind of interesting because we just talked about transformations. And keep in mind, transformations, the XDT transformations are, what you're transforming to at the time that you're doing the transform, so it's done in build mode. But this is another way to do a transformation, so to speak. It's hey, I have this thing in my web.config file called a title in the app settings. I need that to be changed, but guess what? I don't know what it's going to be. Let the destination folks figure it out. I'll provide you a default value if you don't provide it. But if you do provide it, you get to inject that in on your end. Different than transform, which means I've already transformed it before I deployed it. So a way to make it a little bit more dynamic. So just by merit of creating that, if I were to right now go over and I'll just rebuild in release mode, that's fine, Control-Shift-B. And I'm going to cruise over to my scripts, and I'm going to build with the transforms release. I'm just going to build a package real quick and show you how that works on the IIS side by saying transforms.
So to be clear, this
Release.
is the before and after scenario.
Yes.
Change it on my side because I know the value, or let the target change it when they know the secrets.
So I just updated my package, and what the package has in it now is it knows that there's an additional parameter that can be imported. So if I go over to IIS and I blow this one away, and then I decide that I'm going to import an application, and I'm going to choose from the transforms the package I just built in release mode right here, and say open that up, and hit next again. I should be seeing my little parameters thing.
Is it release or debug?
Say again? Oh, I did the wrong file. Let me go back there and build that one again. Let me see. Transforms release to the transforms package. Or 0. Actually, I know another way I can do it. Just real quickly, because of time. I'll do the import again, except I'm going to import directly from where it was built in Visual Studio. So I'll delete this application and content, and go ahead and do the import. And this time I'm going to browse over to Visual Studio, just for time, underneath the Transforms Web, under Object, Release, and Package. I'll just take this one and open it up. Hit next, next. No, I didn't see it there. So, I'm sorry?
Renaming the file back?
Well, I'm obviously doing something
That's
silly.
okay, we get
So
the idea. It's asking the question. It's going to show you that same dialogue that the DOS blog
It
came
sure
up.
will. I just obviously did something silly there, so I apologize. But for time, I do need to move on to the next thing, and that is database deployment. So I'm going to X out of here, and I'm going to go over to this other project here called Shazaml Web. So Alt-WL. And first thing I'm going to do is show the project properties. One of the options that you have your package publish web, which gives you some initial information that kind of serves as default data for your publishing. But you also have package publish SQL. Now I'm going to go to debug mode for this, which is interesting because these screens will change based on what mode you're in. So I would like to import from my web.config file. Now what this means is go check out all my connection strings in the web.config, and I have an opportunity right now to identify each one of them and see, do I want to do anything that is going to manipulate the databases before and after? This is not just changing the connection strings for release. This is about, a typical scenario for this is, in your dev environment, you want to replicate over to your testing environment the data that you had on your machine to over there. So that's really what this is about. So I'm not going to do that with the application services, so I'll remove. I'm not going to do that also for the entities, so I'm going to remove that. So what I have now is what will be the connection string for my database. Well, I do happen to have over in my debug version the data source of where the destination database is. So I'm going to copy that and bring it over into here. And my source database, see, my source database is a SQL CE data. It's just a compact one. I want to actually use SQL Server Express when I get to the local IIS instead. And what I can say is, do I want to modify on the destination SQL Server? Do I want to modify the schema and data, or data only? If I choose schema and data, it will basically reproduce the database as is. The problem is that by default, it doesn't do any drops. So it's assuming that nothing's there, but if something's already there, then you're going to have some issues. So I'm going to say data only, and I'm going to add my own script, which has been created to do the build and drop. So I'll open that up and make sure it's first in the list. So go build the database and then add the data that I currently have in there so that we have the same thing. And now that that's done, I could just simply save that, and I'm going to go and deploy to my local IIS with those settings. I'm sorry?
Let's wait for just a minute. We've only got 10 minutes left. We'll try to do some questions on the mic or via Twitter. We've got to get through a couple more things.
So if I refresh on this, whoops, cancel. Refresh is what I meant to do. I now have a Shazaml.com. If I go ahead and browse this, this is a local version, and what it's doing is it's taking the data and all the information that was in the original project, and it's migrating what was there from the SQL Server CE over to the database. So it's using SQL Server Express instead of the CE database, and the CE database isn't even used anymore. And it noticed that I deployed the debug version of that. So with that said, I think it's really simple to go in and really take advantage of this, especially for those kind of scenarios where you need to kind of set up the target to have the same thing that you had here.
And you can dive really deep into this. There are thousands of features of doing database differentials, deploying the entire database, deploying portions of the database to save data that you already have at the target, just updating certain tables. I mean, there's an entire book that could be written on Web Deploy, just the SQL version of it. But to whet your appetite, that's a taste of it. Flip over to Twitter real quick.
Sure.
And we've got a question. What about deploying to Azure? Is it just as simple? And I can actually speak to this because my entire platform runs on Azure. And just to give you a general idea, it's painful in the beginning, but it's much better now. When I say painful in the beginning, when you deploy to Azure, Azure actually spins up an entire new machine for you. And so it's not just, here's some source code deployed to a hosting environment, press F5 to refresh your web browser, and it's fully deployed. The deployment process to Azure is currently, here is my source code. Please give me a brand new machine, start IIS, create the app pool, configure everything, and the entire process takes about 20 minutes. Now, within the last 3 months, we've gotten to the point where once you have deployed and you have a machine up and running, you don't have to blow that machine away anymore to get a new build up. What you can actually do is activate Web Deploy on your machine once it's running, and then you have 2-second deployments. One thing that I want to be clear on is that you understand that's easily blown away. So the web deployment process for Azure right now is in a testing and development scenario. You make some changes, you deploy to Azure, now you're in your environment and you can work with your production queues and all the goodness that Azure has to offer. But be aware that when that machine goes down and a new machine goes up, you have to activate that web deploy. And so if you have 10 instances of your machine running, web deploy will only be on one of them. So this story will be getting better in the days and weeks and months to come. But for now, understand that web deploy is to speed the process of your development and testing scenarios. I guess I could summarize all of it by saying web deploy for Azure today is not meant for production. It's meant for development and staging and testing.
Right. And so with that stated, I just right-clicked the Azure project that's hosting basically the web role for my MVC3 site. And that little checkbox there is the key. Enable web deploy for all web roles. So what that means is that now I can go to my MVC site and web deploy to it, as opposed to having, if I were to click OK right now, we would be in trouble. I'd be waiting a long time. So I'm going to cancel out.
Actually, can you bring that screen back up for a second? Is that possible?
If it's quick.
We've got a question about security. And the question you might be thinking is, if somebody finds my endpoint, can just anybody web deploy to my production environment? And you'll notice there's a little triangular caution sign there. Web deploy to Azure is only available if you enable RDP, and enabling RDP requires local and remote certificate signing. So in order to go through that process, there's an easy white paper we've got linked in the blog post that you'll see afterwards. But you'll have to set up a certificate on your machine, then you have to deploy that certificate up to Azure, and then only you are allowed to do that deployment. And if there are more than one people on your team, like in my environment, each user will have to have their own certificate in order to do that. So anyway, there's some security involved is what I wanted to point out.
So real quickly, this is the site as it stands right now. You can see the URL address is kind of funky because they give you kind of a working URL until I want to make it available through some public domain. But it's live, it's running right now, and I took a screenshot yesterday of how long it took to do that one Azure deploy. So if oh man, I wanted to say, look how fast it can be to deploy. What if I want to make one change? I have to wait 20 minutes. Or, this is what I can do. I'm going to go ahead and leave that up, go to Visual Studio. When I have that web deploy enabled, I can go to the site that it's going to, and you'll notice that it auto-generates a profile for you. I didn't even have to create this. The moment I check that and it's working, I go back to my site, this is here. So I don't have to do any additional work. All I have to do is say publish. But to make it exciting, what I'm going to do is go into the views and go to the index one here. And I'm going to say, well, let's see, look how fast it can take to. That's the only change I want to make. So I'm going to save that and then go ahead and publish using these settings and hit the publish button here. Now remember, if this were actually a true Azure thing, it would take minutes. It's already done. So if I go over here and hit refresh, look at the slow, and
Please wait while I
drum roll.
restart.
Nice. So, I just deployed to Azure in literally seconds, which for Azure folks is a big deal.
That's new in Azure. Drop of 3.1, I believe, is where Web Deploy, which is about 3 months old. Now there's a version 4, or 1.4 is out. So the Web Deploy stuff is nice. There's lots of examples of it online. It used to be to deploy, you literally deploy and then go take a break because you had that 20-minute wait time. And now with Web Deploy, and I know the stories of what's happening. You can imagine in the coming months, your life will be easier working with Azure. But as of today, that's pretty easy as well. You just have a little bit of work to get there.
So we're just wrapping up. I hate being in the session right before lunch because I'll have tomatoes thrown at me if I don't end right on time, and I'm going to. It looks like we have like 2 minutes. I just wanted to say that as far as the Q&A is concerned, one of the things that Scott did is he built up some of those common questions. If you have any right now, I would say...
There was a question actually over here if somebody wants to grab the mic.
If you want to grab a mic and ask a question. If not, if you would like to go to lunch, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Thank you very much for being in this session.
Thank you,
I'm
guys.
available afterwards if you have any questions as well.